Second.
Second. It was moved by Vice Mayor Maxwell, seconded by Commissioner Amoroso.
Let's do that again.
Where are you going, Lisa?
To load PowerPoint.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thought you were running away. Thank you. City manager, do you wanna open it up while she's floating? Or we wanna wait? The presentation, so. Who's doing the presentation? Or someone doing the presentation? Are you doing the presentation?
Yes, Mayor, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
I apologize.
Hello.
I was having a moment there finding my notes.
Pay attention.
Fly.
Is this something I said? As you're finding your backup, we've been discussing the idea of what's become known as the Lakewood 2020 plan since April 16th, 2013. It goes back almost 13 different times that the commission's met over this to hone this down. And what you have before you is the culmination of that. It's the actual resolution that creates the language that would appear on a bond referendum on August the 26th, so that the voters could consider authorizing the city to issue the general obligation bond of $63.5 million to go towards the infrastructure improvements outlined in the Lakewood 2020 program. And that's really what's before you tonight, is that language. And upon approving it, it would ensure that it would go to the supervisor election and appear on the ballot on the August 26th vote. And that's the short of it.
Okay.
So we're available for questions.
What is the presentation that she's trying to upload?
I think that's Commissioner McVoy's.
Oh, that's yours, oh,
Yeah.
gotcha. Okay,
I can let the attorney read the resolution.
please.
Resolution number 29-2014 of the City Commission of the City of Lake River, calling a bond referendum for the issuance of general obligation bonds to construct certain capital improvements and providing an effective date.
We had a long conversation about this last time, for those who weren't at the meeting, and I'm sure we're gonna have a lengthy conversations again today. Just one thing, one of the things that was mentioned the last time, and I just wanna talk about this right off the bat if I could, and I wanted to ask you actually, Glenn. A lot of the questions were about assessments. And they were saying, people were talking about can't we assess for portions of this or for the whole thing or whatever. And I had asked you after the meeting, could you look into the legality of that or whatever? Did you have a chance to?
Yes, and we spoke with and reviewed the documents from the bond council and the financial advisors, and the short answer is theoretically it's possible, but realistically it's not. Because the bond issue is complex in terms of the number of items you're doing. You're doing streets, you're doing infrastructure below the streets, you're doing the water, the sewer, and it's spread out over an urban area that's already built up. This is not like you're building a new street and assessing people for a new road. You're really rebuilding roads, and in some cases, obviously, new roads and new sidewalks. So, I would say that in theory, it's possible, but in reality, it really is not. To try and put together a program of assessments would be a nightmare. So.
Has it been done in other, I know it hasn't been done in the state of Florida, but has it been done elsewhere in the country?
I'll say I'm not Google, but to the best of our knowledge, at least in the state of Florida, a project this has not been successfully done, an assessment process that we've been able to find, because again, urban area, you're doing so many different streets, so many different areas, so many different components. How do you calculate whether Joe Smith's residence gets charged X versus Susie's residence that gets charged Y? Because each one is different. Some are getting just roads, some are getting additional infrastructure, so it'd be very difficult to do.
The closest that I could find was out in the Midwest, when I was doing a little research on it too, is that when there are home sites or large extended properties that all utilize the same roadway, when a road projects, they have frontage on said existing roadway, then there's a way, because it's the only way to all of those properties, so therefore it could be shared by all the people, because everyone is benefiting or gaining the same or equal amount on each one. But then if you were to get to an intersection, say here in our city, who benefits
Yeah.
at that intersection. That's where it starts to get sticky.
That's where it starts to break down.
Yeah, that's what, so, okay.
And maybe you can
Good point.
thank you, Mayor. Maybe you can clarify also that it seems like if one were to try assessments and there isn't a good precedent, we're opening ourselves up for legal challenges to it, which doesn't seem like a good
And
thing.
as you know, we're all trying to put those days behind us. We're trying to
Exactly.
Avoid those legal challenges and be proactive, avoid them. So
Yeah.
you would probably draw a challenge from somebody. Whoever felt they weren't being treated fairly, whoever thought, why am I being assessed this, I don't use this road that much, and it's just, like I said, theoretically it's possible, in reality it would be a nightmare to try and figure out how to do this.
Do you want to also read the official bond language?
Yeah, did you want me to read the
Yes,
ballot?
please.
Ballot
I would,
language. That might
yeah,
be good to read that.
for the record, please.
So what the ballot would say if you approve this tonight is approval of Lake Worth 2020 bonds for public infrastructure projects within the city. And again, this would be on the August 26, 2014 ballot. Shall the city of Lake Worth be authorized to issue bonds to acquire and improve roadway, sidewalk, street light, streetscape, drainage, water, and sewer facilities located within the city in one or more series, not exceeding a total principal amount of $63,500,000 payable from an annual ad valorem tax return not later than 30 years from the date of each issuance and bearing interest at a rate not exceeding the maximum legal rate. Then for or against.
And that sets the maximums, as y'all discussed before, with the total amount of the 63.5. The current borrowings are in three different tranches leading up to the total amount. Also, it maxes at 30 years. It may not be that you want to do a 30-year or 20-year. So these are set at the worst-case scenario parameters of the amount and the years of maturity.
Can the borrowings, this is some of the questions that have come my way, and there have been many, the monies can only be used, it's in the bond agreements, isn't it highlight, I mean, it makes it mandatory that the bonds can only be used for roadway projects?
For these projects,
That's it.
That's what's in here.
It can never be used for
The
anything
roads,
else
right,
additional,
right,
long
streetlights.
after we're,
Water, sewer, the things that are
On
set
some-
forth here, that's the projects you have to use it for.
And then it's also reflected in the bond covenants. And the
Okay.
finance director, very sit in the back if you want to have any further comments for you.
okay, we'll probably get into that in a little bit. Any other questions? Commissioner McBoy, would you like to do your presentation?
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
I guess the sort of the context for making my comments at this point is asking all of us to reach into our pockets an additional amount to borrow money, pay the interest on it for improvements for the city is not something that I inherently think is a bad idea. I think it's actually a pretty good idea, and I think Ms. Sharp and I have shared views on a number of occasions that we both think there are things that could be improved in our city and need to, and they cost money. And as residents, it's not inappropriate to ask us to step up and put some money into the pot. My concern, and as I look at the list of things, and I've looked at them at the various meetings, roadways, sidewalks, streetlights, streetscape, drainage, water, sewer, they're not very sexy things, but they're definitely important nuts and bolt things that need to be done in a city, and I have no problem with that. I'm generally pretty much in support of the various thinkings about how to distribute the tranches, because I get to say tranches now too. And all of that is not something that I have any issue with. My issue is, at this particular point in history of our planet and of people on the planet, we are getting exposed daily with information that says that sea level rise, well, that's a known thing. It's been happening steadily for the last 100 years, but it's speeding up. And climate change, and particularly global warming, climate disruptions, is something that is being raised all the time worldwide as something that we unfortunately have to deal with. It's not something that we can ignore. We are coastal. We're right on the ocean. So any changes in either weather or sea level rise definitely affect us. So my concern is, are we taking that appropriately into account as we ask our citizens to spend money? Because we're spending money that will have an influence for a long time to come. And if I can figure out how to move forward here, there we go. I went back to a November 2012 Camp Dresser McGee engineering report that was done at the request of the city for the city. And I won't bore you with all of the detailed language, I tried to thin it out a little bit, but it's basically quotes from that. And, you know, they make the point that I think we're all aware of, that as we think about climate change, global warming, infrastructure decisions that we make now are going to be what we have to live with for multiple decades forward. So we better be thinking about, have we thought about taking into account any issues that we can expect to see? They point out in that study, the first thing you want to do is a formal assessment of the city's vulnerability. How high are we? What are the things that we would be subject to increased risks? How does it affect our water supply, saltwater intrusion? Some of these will come up later in their specific comments. How does it affect surges? Adding that on to average rise, adding on storms. To do a formal assessment, this is the kind of thing that if you're an insurer and you're looking at cars, you do an assessment of, you know, how old is the driver, do they smoke, do they do this, do they drink while they drive, all those things. You can do formal risk assessments, people do them all the time. We should be doing this for a city before we spend a lot of money. And you know, they pointed out obvious things: water supply, water demand, water quality, flooding and drainage are all things that you know, without thinking too hard about it, come right off the bat. They point out that it's not only average sea level rise, and I hear that a lot in meetings that I go to on that, but it's the interaction of worsening storms and sea level rise that is where we get hit hard. And to put it in a little bit more technical terms, many people I think have heard of the 100-year storm or the 10-year storm. That's a storm that is expected to come back with that kind of frequency. Obviously it can do different from that, but on average it'll show up every 100 years. Many of you following the news have noticed that we've had 10-year events or 100-year events multiple years in a row. And that's something that's being noticed around the world, that the old 100-year event is now something that's happening more frequently, and that's something that makes planning very difficult and makes it more expensive. And again, they didn't use this term, but I thought it was the clearest way, the double whammy. If you're already at a higher sea level rise and you're getting a bigger storm, we get a bigger surge in here, and all of the problems associated with that. And these are some of the same sort of concerns that just relating to stormwater. Let's see. So are other places, are other parts of government in the U.S. paying attention to this? And the answer is a little bit of research shows that yes, they definitely are. The EPA has a whole series of tools available for working on water utilities. I know that some of our utilities are paying some attention to this. I've seen members of staff at some of the climate change meetings, but I'm not seeing the formal assessment of risk or of the costs that go with it. What about other communities? Miami Beach is very active on this. They get flooding a couple times a year already, and they're very concerned about their risk. Fort Lauderdale is also actively planning for this. Broward County is a national leader on planning for climate change and putting concrete things. City of Hoboken, I don't know that it's known as an enormously forward-thinking city. I've been there a few times, it's not a bad place. I cut out all of the detail and just gave you the head titles of the different sections of what they've put in place for their community resiliency plan. I'm sure a lot of you can guess that this came after Hurricane Sandy. If you look in Vermont, the same thing happened. My sister lives in Vermont. Vermont, who thinks about hurricanes in Vermont? They had a hurricane there and it did huge damage, enormous damage up there. And they had costs that they'd never had before, that they had things that they had to deal with. And they're changing how they're rebuilding some of the things. A plan is going in place that says, you know, look, you've got change coming. We don't know exactly what it is. We've got various people who do a lot of thinking about what the possible trajectories could look like. You can use that as a basis for planning. A lot of items on that they're looking at. This is one that I think should concern all of us. It's not just planning. Obviously, as elected officials, we are responsible for protecting our residents. But we have an additional responsibility, which is to minimize our legal exposure as elected officials and for our city. Right now, there are insurance groups that are suing communities because they say, you know about this issue. There is no reason that you cannot know about this issue, and if you're not doing anything, we're incurring extra insurance costs because of your inaction. And I predict that a number of those lawsuits will be successful. And that is something that's going to be coming further and further. We know the trend. In Florida, many of the major insurers don't want to insure houses here anymore. That's why we have the situation with Citizen. The insurance companies, one of the most interesting place to get information on climate change is the reinsurer. I don't know how they pronounce it, but it's RE. It's an international reinsurer. They're the people that insure all the regular insurance companies. They are on top of this in a big way. They're very concerned because all of their predictive work, you say, well, the risk of a tree falling is about X, and you look back at how often trees fell. What happens if your storm frequency changes? What happens if your intensity changes? Now you can't predict on that, and your costs, you don't know how to charge people for risk. That's going to come. We will have liability. We will have exposure if we do nothing. Showed up both in Forbes and in the Christian Science Monitor. So what do I suggest? And I certainly don't have all the answers by any means, but I think this is a starting point. I think before we go forward with asking our residents to borrow money, let's do the first step. Let's get a formal assessment, whether we do it in-house or whether we contract it out or we do it with citizen committee, however we do it, get a serious formal assessment. What do we think our risks are? So we write them down and we can all think about it. Then, how do you translate those into costs? You know that there are going to be costs that are associated, let's say risks of water supply, saltwater intrusion on our wells, or stormwater backing up and increasing frequency of that. Those will have costs. We need to know what those costs are. If they're $100,000 a year and we're doing a $60 million bond issue, hey, no problem. $100,000, we can absorb that, we'll figure it out. Maybe it's not on this list, but we'll figure out a way to deal with it. If it's tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, we better be aware of that number now when we're asking people to support the work. And then those costs obviously need to be thought about, and we need to figure out what is our risk tolerance. What do we want to do things about, and what do we want to say, you know what, if the sky falls, then the sky falls. That's something, a discussion that we need to have as a community, but to do that, we need this sort of a detailed assessment of what our risks are so that we can make an intelligent, wise choice about what we want to spend money on. And that's why at this point, I am not at all convinced that we've done, I don't see any document that I can point to that covers number one here. And so I don't have any way of assessing those costs, and I don't have any way of incorporating in. So I cannot in good conscience vote in favor of putting this on the ballot. I'm not saying that I wouldn't vote for it in the future. Once we've done this, we've taken those costs into account and decided as a community which ones we want to incorporate. At that point, I'll be more than happy to vote in favor. At this point, I cannot.
Commissioner Sturdy?
Thank you, Mayor. Commissioner Foy, I really do appreciate you again bringing this issue up. I do have some background in this area, and so I'd like to maybe, even though I didn't see what you planned on putting up tonight, I wouldn't mind taking a few minutes to respond to those things.
Of course.
I think they have some merit and concern. However, they are long-term issues, and I would suggest that staff has put some time and effort to thinking. I've read a number of the reports. They've addressed it in one of the reactions that you weren't there in Commissioner Maxwell, Vice Mayor Maxwell's district meeting.
You know, I was
They
out of
were
town.
brought up, and that was handed out to them dealing with some of these issues here. As far as some of the solutions, I know folks in the Broward Dade Climate Action Committee there, you know, Professor Apate, Tony is down there, and he could not point to any particular definite solutions. I don't know if we would recommend building all our seawalls up. Would we recommend raising all of our roads? Would we recommend doing something more with our pier? We had a chance to do something in the casino and put the building on pilings, but we decided not to. So our casino over there is just on the sand, it's not on pilings. So that would have been a very good measure to take. which was not taken. This year is a mild year for hurricanes. It just got a little bit adjusted, but we've enjoyed, thank God, some mild seasons. As far as energy resiliency goes, we're in the middle of addressing whether we fix up our power plant or we look at offering it for sale. If it goes for sale, I'm sure some of the big companies have their own resiliency measures that we would have to rely on. As far as us doing ourselves in-house, that particular proposal would incorporate a level of resiliency which we would be able to be off the grid ourselves, depending on how well we were to handle that with our overhead power lines and all, which we have to address, and everybody does all over our state. I believe currently our FEMA status is in good status. I know staff in planning and zoning pay a lot of attention to when you bring drawings, and in fact, many people cannot improve their houses if their improvements are more than 50% of the value of the structure. So if your house is worth $150,000, but $100,000 of that is the house, and you want to do something more than $50,000, you have to bring the entire property up to FEMA standards, which means in some cases, you might be 2 feet above your neighbor's house, which we've seen a few issues around that have caused people at the end of South 18th Avenue on the Intercoastal actually block the water from getting into the Intercoastal and have caused local flooding over there due to that requirement. So we do have in our drainage the ability to put in backflow preventers, meaning when the water pushes back from high tide and you have a double whammy, let's say, of high tide and a storm coming up, we don't want that water pushing back in and just, which we've seen, I've seen in my neighborhood in South Palm Lake, water gushing out of the catch basins and things from time to time. Putting in these backflow preventers in there would help mitigate that so that the water can dissipate. We're very lucky to be near the intercoastal waterways because in our western areas, they are totally dependent on the water getting into the ground. And if you've had some sustained rain, it would saturate and the water table comes up, and they really have challenges. We're lucky that when the tide goes out here and the water moves, we have a fairly quick recovery. And I've seen this all over the place when, I grew up in Fort Lauderdale and saw in some of the full moons during the falls, and those things come up, water come up above the road, and that was, unfortunately, I remember it was almost 50 years ago. So this is not a new thing that's happening. It's been addressed. So as far as particular assessment goes, I think the city has looked at what might be a logical rationale for things to do with current problems that we have in the city. Things that are not 20-year problems or 30-year problems down the line, but problems right now. In fact, there are problems probably 10 years, 15 years ago. So we're trying to catch up as well as anticipate, but assessing what the cost might be if water were to come up 2 feet in the next 50 years, or 60 years, or 100 years, I don't know. There's a lot of very smart people out there that can't tell you exactly what to do. The city of New York is talking about some crazy thing about putting big gates and stuff out there to try and they're talking billions of dollars. We can't afford thousands in some areas. So I think it would be really, really challenging for us to try to figure out something that on the state and the federal level they're having complete, brain failure there to come up with what technology really could we use? What are the solutions? You can't come up with a cost if you don't have even a technology or a solution to satisfy it. How in the world would you come up with a cost? Then how would you put that into the bond? There's 35,000 people here. And we're trying to think of what would be a reasonable way for us to improve our overall lifestyle, a level of local safety. And again, I might sound like a salesman, Mr. Tim, but I am fully selling the the city of Lake Worth in its own regard. I have complete faith in what everybody would like to do, and that's what the vote's gonna be about. It's not me selling, it's who can vote. So, in terms of what this is about as an option for the years of people complaining about the potholes and cracked sidewalks, especially folks that try to really sell our city, the marketing, the real estate folks, they have the problem, they've talked to us many times, and so have you. And that's why you cannot improve upon our situation if we keep doing the same things as we've been doing. And so I respect your comments, Commissioner McVoy, but I really would say, I don't think even if we took 1 or 2 more years, you're gonna have any technologies come up that will allow us as a city to come up with something that may give our citizens an immediate solution in the next 5 years, which is what this plan is about, to improve and have more people come in, live in our city, help contribute, be real contributors, dilute our responsibilities in terms of how much money we all pay in taxes, right, and improve the overall. People have been talking about us and coming into our city, and you've seen now a number of investment from outside folks come here. So, in essence, I understand what you're saying. Being around this issue for almost 20 years now myself, I still am not aware of any really good, rational solutions to combating climate control in the way that maybe you would like to see. So, but I appreciate your comments.
Let's go to public comment now too, because I'd like to hear, we'll make some comment, we'll come back to us making comments, but I'd like to be able to.
say that.
Mike.
I would like to really want public comment, then we'll come back.
I'd kind of prefer to address some of the things that the Commissioner's already raised, but it's as you wish.
Joanne Golden, followed by Peter Tim. This way we can continue our conversation, sure everyone has a chance to speak.
Joanne Golden, 502 North Conway, former commissioner from 2007 to 2011. I have the same concerns that Commissioner McVoy has. I feel that the extent of the green element of 2020 is severely lacking. I think that the piece of paper that was handed out at Commissioner Maxwell's meeting, and I've seen it from the Climate Change Compact, had quite a few things on it, and we sort of said we signed up for it, and I hadn't seen our name on the list, so I was concerned that we were not part of the compact. But nonetheless, I found that the only part that we were doing was purchasing green products, and 18% of the funding that we were going to ask was for green asphalt, green